Morning. Good to see y'all today. As you probably know, having known them for a few years now, Hayden and Liam are very different people. They have different gifts, they have different personalities. He's pretty excited right now. Hayden is very intelligent. He's very intellectual. He's very cautious. He looks at all the parameters, and he would say the word parameters probably, of a situation. It is a word. He would look at everything around a situation. He'd get to know everything. He loves to build things. He loves to build robots. Loves to read. Liam, he's Liam. He's very physical. He's very affectionate. He wants to be out and about and doing things and being with people and running amok. Very strong-willed. But like all children, they reach points where a task can feel too big or too overwhelming for them to achieve it. And it's easy for us to say, oh, well, they're kids, they'll grow up and get over it. A spelling test is not going to be the end of the world. But in Liam's eyes, a spelling test is a big deal. And sometimes there's big words like springtime, which he got right last week. Yes! But when he started saying these words last week, just kind of an example, he was like, these words are too big. I can't get it. There's no way. We're like, we'll do it bit by bit. Like 3 words each day. We'll keep going over them. You'll get it. Last week, he only missed one. Ostrich. Which, to be fair, it's kind of a silly word. But we look at the things that kids will think, oh, well, this is too big, too much, too overwhelming. Go, oh, they're kids, that's cute, they'll get over it. But really, we do the same thing. We just kind of cover it up better. Or we just pretend it doesn't exist. That's what I'm pretty good at doing. Because as adults, we've learned how to push things under the rug, how to kind of push it out of our minds, how to ignore it, or to say, oh, well, it's not really that big a deal, when inside we're crumbling to pieces. You probably know by now that my favorite verse is Isaiah 46, verse 4, where God tells Israel, even to your old age, I am he, and even to gray hairs, I will carry you. It says, I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you. And then in Isaiah 46, God is telling Israel through the prophet Isaiah about the powerlessness, the uselessness of idols versus his own true power. He's telling Israel, hey, look, you're going after the wrong thing. What you're chasing can't do anything. I'm the one who made you. I'm the one who can sustain you. I'm the one who can help you. So come back to me. And to be honest, as people, there are times where we feel either unworthy or unable to honor God and do His will. Not that when we do feel worthy, we're saying, well, look how great I am, but we recognize, truly, we understand just how worthy we're made through the blood of Christ. But we'll say things like, well, I can't do that, or I need to fix this sin problem first, or just, I'm not that good at church things. Or there's too much going on in my life. Things are too hard. Things are too questionable. Things are too much up in the air. Really, we say if we boil it down, well, I'm not of much use to God, so I should just kind of lay low. The problem with that thought is that it doesn't jive with what we see in the Bible. You see, in Scripture, God makes great use of faithful people who seem not to be much use. There's a whole lot of useless people that God makes a whole lot of really good use out of. And we see it kind of over and over and over and over and over again. One is, well, Abraham, who struggled with lying and fear. You know, the guy who God says, leave the land, leave your father's household, go out where I show you. And he says, okay. And he becomes, the father of the faith, the father of Israel, the man who God says, through your seed, all nations will be blessed. This man who struggled with lying and fear, who not once but twice told his wife, hey, tell these people that you're my sister so they don't kill me and try to steal you. Apparently, his son Isaac caught on to it because he did the same thing. He's a real good example of a father, right? And yet, through danger, through battle, as he went to battle 4 kings to rescue his nephew Lot, there are all sorts of trials through wandering around, a nomad with no homeland of his own. God still made enormous use of him. So Abraham was the father of, we say he's the father of faith, but he certainly wasn't perfect, and he certainly didn't start that way, but was grown into that over time. We could talk about David, who lied, cheated, murdered, who was filled with pride on occasion. David, the man after God's own heart, the man who, conducted a census. We think, conducting a census isn't that big a deal, but God specifically said, don't do this. And when David does it, what's God do? He sends a plague through Israel until David repents and sacrifices. David, the man who murders another man after sleeping with his wife so they don't find out. And yet, through battle, through a coup d'etat, through all sorts of ups and downs, all sorts of threats on his life, God still makes great use of him. David, the man who raised his son so well, his son threw him out of the kingdom for a short time. But the man who kept turning back to God, who kept seeking God, who kept seeking His word, His laws, His promises, the fulfillment of God's will, despite all his failures. And now we know him as the great king, the man after God's own heart, the man through whom God said, hey, it's your throne that's going to be established forever. That we see happen when Jesus comes on the scene. Well, that's Old Testament though, right? I mean, that's Old Testament, God working in specific ways. In the Old Testament, things are different now. Except we get to Peter, who had a lot of anger problems, a whole lot of pride, fear, disloyalty. Peter, the man who, when Jesus was rejected, was it Peter or was it James and John? I think it was James and John, different story. So we'll switch stories because I can't remember. Peter. Never, cool-headed, level-headed Peter, right? Peter, the man who sees Jesus in his time of greatest despair and sorrow and says, I don't know him. Nah, you better believe I don't know him. I don't know him. Back off. Right? Isn't that Peter? The Peter who, well, walked on the water. The Peter who, despite all of his failures, Jesus brings along after the resurrection and says, "Do you love me?" Peter says, "You know I do." And he says, "Well, then you feed my sheep." 3 times. The Peter who Jesus restores as an apostle, who becomes the Peter who we have recorded speaking on the day of Pentecost, the Peter who is brought before the Sanhedrin and who speaks boldly for Christ, who helps to lead the church in Jerusalem. This is the Peter, this prideful, angry, sometimes disloyal man who is restored and made whole, who is made enormous use of by Jesus himself. We could bring up Paul, the murderer, the persecutor of God's people, the man who had everything that a man in his position could want. Power, prestige, authority, influence. This is a man who could go to the high priest and say, "Hey, give me permission to go to another town and start arresting people." And the high priest said, "Sure, no problem." And who could not only say that, but who had apparently the funds to fund this expedition, because Paul's not going to go off by himself. In fact, we're told there are men with him. And yet, after meeting Jesus, he's a man who, through shipwrecks and beatings and jail and stoning and threats on his life, we know as having written a great portion of the New Testament. So God made great use of them. All these people, through human eyes, through human experience, would have been considered probably fairly big failures in a whole lot of areas. And yet, God can and will use us if we will put ourselves out there and let him. See, what I understand from these, what I understand from Scripture is that God does not only have use for us when we're doing good. God does not only have use for us when we're 100% on everything. When we've got it all figured out, after we've got our lives figured out and everything in their little boxes and all the marks checked and all the T's crossed and I's dotted, only then can God use us. That's not what we see in the Bible. Rather, what we see is that we need to trust God, who says what we are and what he calls us to. So we need to trust what God says about us rather than what we say about us. We have to trust what God says about us instead of what other people are saying about us. And we have to trust what God is calling us to do rather than anyone or anything else, including ourselves. Because that's a real easy trap to fall into, right? To listen to us, to listen to ourselves. Well, I think that I'm, or I think that I should. Instead of asking the question, what does God say that I am? What does God call me to do? And it's easy to look at Abraham and David and Peter and Paul and say, well, those are special cases, right? I mean, these are paragons of faith, people that God used powerfully. Like they're a special case. We can't compare ourselves to them. In which case, I encourage you to turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is my favorite chapter in the Bible by now. Hebrews is my favorite book. Hebrews 11 is my favorite chapter. 11 through 13 is my favorite section. Isaiah 46:4 is my favorite verse. Don't know what. Don't know what happened there. But in Hebrews 11, starting in verse 32, after talking about the paragons of faith, after talking about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Moses, he says, what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to speak of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, of Samuel and David and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again. And we get this far and we go, yeah! Look at all the great things God has done. And then we get to the second part of verse 35, and we read that others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourging, yes, of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were tempted. They were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth, and all of these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. So they say, oh, well, there was Peter and Paul and Abraham and David. And yet there are countless others who answered the call of faith, countless others who we do not know. When God tells Elijah, hey, you're not alone in following me, there are 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Do we know any of who those 7,000 were? I don't know a single name from that list. I've never seen a list. But you know what? They were called faithful by God in a very dark time. There are countless others who answered the call of faith. And some received greatness in this life. Some subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, attained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong. And they were faithful. And yet, others received horror beyond imagining. They had mocking trials, mocking, scourging, chains and imprisonment, stoned, sawn in two. That one always really gives me the willies. But they were faithful. And they're remembered as faithful. And regardless of what happened in this life, all were made whole through the blood of Jesus Christ. All were made complete. All were brought to fulfillment. All received the final reward of being made whole through Jesus' blood. And all bear witness to the fulfillment of God's promise. Regardless of what they encountered in this life, regardless of what they saw in this life, whether they stopped the mouths of lions or were sawn in two, the writer says they bear witness to the fulfillment of God's promise. Which brings us to the first two verses of chapter 12. Where he says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and just stop there. Therefore, so because of what he's just said, because of the people he's just mentioned, because we're surrounded by them as a great cloud, because they are witnesses of God's loyalty and fulfillment, let us answer the call as well. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Because they bear witness to the fulfillment of God's promises, because they now stand and say, God is faithful. He says, let us answer the call as well. Because they bear witness, we can lay aside every weight of sin. Because they bear witness, we can run with endurance the whole race of Christ. Because they bear witness, we can trust in Jesus seated in power. Because they bear witness, we can move forward. And sometimes it's a whole lot easier than others. And sometimes it's a whole lot harder than others. But the fact is, God is faithful. And there are millennia of souls who bear witness to the faithfulness and fulfillment of God's promise. And so we can stand confident in answering the call of God. Whatever that means, whatever that looks like, we can stand confident in Him because He will carry us through. I'm not going to say He's going to carry you through and it's all going to look great, because sometimes it looks horrible. But He will carry us through. And He will bring us to His side. And He will fulfill His promises, and we will know Him face to face as He Himself wipes every tear, as He Himself brings us to His side, as He Himself, makes it so that we know Him as He knows us, which is quite a thing when you're considering that this is God that we're talking about. And He will carry us to that end. So let us stand, let us sing.